The shuttle was small and quiet. Ambassador Yun Hana sat near the window, watching the massive shape of Station Orith 7 grow larger against the black emptiness of space. The station was built like a ring of silver metal, spinning slowly around a bright blue planet that belonged to no one. This was neutral ground. Every species in the Galactic Union came here once a year for the Security Summit, where they argued about borders, weapons, trade routes, and who mattered enough to have a voice. Earth had only been part of the Galactic Union for 5 years. 5 years since first contact. 5 years since humanity learned it was not alone, and that most of the galaxy already had opinions about them. Those opinions were not kind. Humans were small. Humans were soft. Humans came from a single planet on the edge of a quiet arm of the galaxy, and they had only recently figured out how to travel between stars. To the elder species, races that had been in the Union for thousands of years, humans were children who had wandered into a room full of adults. Hana did not care what they thought. She had spent 20 years in intelligence before becoming a diplomat, and she knew that being underestimated was sometimes the most powerful position to hold. But she also knew that power meant nothing if you lost your seat at the table. Sitting across from her was Kang Do-hyun. He wore a plain dark uniform, with no medals, no ribbons, no rank insignia visible. His hair was cut short, and his face was calm in the way that water is calm before something rises from underneath it. Do-hyun was a former Navy SEAL from the Republic of Korea, and he had been assigned as Hana's personal security and military representative for this summit. He had not spoken since they left Earth's orbital station 3 hours ago. Next to Do-hyun sat Bae Sun-woo, the youngest member of the delegation. Sun-woo was a Spec Ops analyst, the kind of person who read alien biology reports the way other people read morning news. He had a tablet in his hands, and he had not looked up from it once during the flight. "The Marathi are going to be a problem," Sun-woo said, still reading. "Commander Dreas filed a formal motion 2 days ago. He wants our provisional membership reviewed." Hana did not react. "On what grounds?" "Physical and military inadequacy," Sun-woo said. He turned the tablet so she could see. "He's arguing that humans are too biologically weak to contribute to Union security operations. He wants our seat revoked." Hana looked at the document for a long moment. Then she looked at Do-hyun. "You heard that?" Do-hyun nodded once. "Keep your hands in your pockets and your mouth shut in there," she said. "I'll handle the talking." Do-hyun said nothing, which Hana took as agreement. It was the only kind of agreement he ever gave. The shuttle docked with a soft clang. The airlock opened, and the smell hit them first. Recycled air mixed with 100 different atmospheric filters, each one tuned for a different species. The corridor beyond was wide enough for 3 humans to walk side by side, but it had been designed for creatures much larger than humans. The ceiling was 4 meters high. The lights were cold and white. A Union escort, a thin gray-skinned Tasari with large dark eyes, led them through the main concourse toward the council hall. Other delegations moved through the corridors around them. Hana recognized several species from briefing documents. The Halwen, tall and smooth-skinned, with heads shaped like elongated teardrops. The Tasari, smaller and quicker, with nimble hands and nervous energy. And the Marathi. The Marathi were impossible to miss. They stood 7 feet tall on average, with thick bone plates covering their skin like natural armor. Each one had 4 arms, 2 large upper arms and 2 smaller lower arms, and their faces were flat and broad, with deep-set eyes that looked like they had been carved from dark stone. They moved through the corridor like they owned it, and every other species stepped aside to let them pass. Commander Dreas walked at the front of the Marathi delegation. He was older than the soldiers around him, but no less massive. His bone plates had a darker color that came with age, and his eyes swept the corridor with the lazy confidence of someone who had never been challenged by anything he could not break. When his gaze passed over the human delegation, his mouth twisted into something that was not quite a smile. It was closer to the look a person gives an insect before deciding whether to step on it. Behind Dreas walked his personal guard, a younger Marathi trooper named Golvan. Golvan was even taller than his commander, and his bone plates were pale and sharp-edged, the sign of a warrior in his physical prime. He looked at the humans with open disgust. Hana kept walking. Dohan kept walking. Sunwoo made a quiet note on his tablet. The council hall was enormous. It was shaped like a half-circle, with rows of seats rising up from a central floor, where speakers could address the full assembly. Each delegation had an assigned section, marked with their species symbol and flag. Earth's section was near the back, in the highest row, as far from the center as possible, without being outside the room entirely. It was the seat given to species that did not matter yet. Hana took her position. Dohan stood 2 steps behind her, hands at his sides. Sunwoo sat and opened his tablet. The chamber filled slowly. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of species took their places. The noise was a low rumble of alien languages, translation devices clicking and humming as they worked. Then High Arbiter Palan entered. He was old, even by the standards of his species. His skin was paper-thin and almost translucent, and he moved with the careful slowness of someone who had been alive for a very long time. He took his place at the central podium and raised one hand. The room went silent. "This summit is called to order," Palan said, his voice amplified through the hall's speakers. "Before we begin scheduled proceedings, there is a matter that requires immediate attention." His pale eyes moved across the chamber and settled, briefly, on the human delegation. The provisional membership of the species known as humanity is hereby placed under formal review, effective immediately. Hana's fingers tightened on the arm of her chair. Behind her, Dohyun did not move. He simply watched the room, the way a man watches a door he knows is about to open. The chamber was still quiet after Palan's announcement. Hana could feel the weight of it pressing down on the room like a hand on her chest. She had prepared for the Marathi to challenge Earth's membership, but she had expected it to come later in the summit, buried inside some larger motion where it could be debated slowly. Having it placed first, before anything else, meant someone had pushed for it. Someone with influence over the High Arbiter. She looked at Commander Dreas. He was already looking at her. His expression was patient and satisfied, like a hunter who had set a trap and was watching the animal walk toward it. Palan gestured toward the Marathi section. "Commander Dreas of the Marathi Empire has submitted the motion. He will present his case." Dreas stood. He was enormous even among his own kind, and when he walked to the central floor, his footsteps made the kind of sound that demanded attention. He carried a small device in one of his lower hands, which he placed on the speaker's podium. A holographic screen appeared in the air above the chamber floor, wide enough for every delegate to see. "Members of the council," Dreas began, his voice deep and unhurried. "5 years ago, we allowed a new species into this union, a species from a small planet with short lives, fragile bodies, and no natural weapons. We were told they had potential. We were told they would grow. I stand before you today to show you what that potential looks like." He pressed the device. The holographic screen lit up with footage. It showed human soldiers in training, running, shooting, doing hand-to-hand combat drills. But the footage had been carefully selected. The angles made the humans look slow. The comparisons showed Marathi troopers lifting objects that 10 humans could not move. One clip showed a human soldier struggling under a weighted pack while a Marathi trooper carried the same weight with one arm, barely noticing it. Quiet laughter came from several sections of the chamber. The Marathi delegates watched with open pride. Some of the other delegations shook their heads, as if the evidence was obvious and the conclusion was clear. Dreas let the footage play for a long time. Then he turned it off and faced the assembly. This species cannot run as fast as any member race. They cannot endure the environments we endure. They cannot fight what we fight. They are a burden on Union security, not a contribution to it. I move that their provisional membership be revoked, and their delegation be sent home. The chamber murmured. Several delegates nodded. The Hulwen representative, a tall female with silver skin, remained perfectly still, her expression blank. The Tasari delegation whispered among themselves nervously. Pelon looked toward the human section. The human delegation may respond. Hana stood. She was not tall. She was not loud. She walked to the central floor in simple, measured steps, and when she reached the podium, she did not touch Dreas's device. She did not use any footage. She just spoke. 3 years ago, she said, her voice clear and steady. A pirate corridor opened along the Tasari trade route near the Hollow Reach. 12 freighters were destroyed in 2 months. The Marathi were asked to clear the corridor. The pirates avoided them. The Hulwen were asked next. They sent a diplomatic envoy. The pirates ignored them. She paused and looked directly at Dreas. Earth sent 4 ships and 26 operators. They mapped the pirate staging points in 9 days, boarded their command vessel in the dark, killed every armed hostile on board, and captured their leadership alive. The corridor was clear in under 3 weeks. No freighters were lost after that. The chamber was silent. Hana continued. Commander Dreas showed you footage of our soldiers lifting weights. I am showing you results. You may decide which matters more. She returned to her seat. The silence held for several seconds before the murmuring began again, but it had a different tone now. Some delegates were looking at the human section with something that was not quite respect, but was no longer dismissal either. Dreas stood completely still on the central floor. His 4 hands were clenched. His jaw was tight. Hana had not just defended Earth's position, she had embarrassed him in front of every species that mattered. She had made his empire look slow and ineffective compared to a species he had just called weak. He turned and walked back to the Marathi section. He said something quietly to the trooper standing behind his seat. The trooper was Golvan, and his pale bone plate seemed to tighten across his face as he listened to his commander. Then Golvan stepped forward. He walked onto the central floor without permission, without announcement. This was a breach of protocol. Only delegates and invited speakers were allowed on the floor during session. But the Marathi had done this before, sent their soldiers onto the floor to intimidate smaller delegations into silence. No one had ever stopped them, because no one wanted to be the one to try. Golvan walked past the podium. He walked past the Hulwen section, past the Tasari section, and straight up the steps toward the human delegation. His footsteps were heavy and deliberate. Each one sent a small vibration through the floor. He stopped directly in front of Kang Doyun. Doyun was standing in his usual position, 2 steps behind Hana's seat. He was almost 2 feet shorter than Golvan. He had no armor, no visible weapon, no bone plates, no forearms. He looked by every galactic standard like exactly the kind of creature that should step aside. Golvan looked down at him. Then he turned his head toward the chamber so his voice would carry. "This is your warrior," he said loudly. "This is what protects your species?" Doyun did not respond. He looked up at Golvan, the way a man looks at a road he is about to cross. Golvan raised one of his upper arms, the larger, stronger pair, and brought it across Doyun's face in a flat, open slap. The sound cracked through the hall like a gunshot. Do-hyun's head snapped to the side. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. The chamber gasped. Several delegates rose from their seats. A Tasari diplomat covered her mouth. The Halwan representative's silver eyes went wide. This was a dominance ritual. In Marathi culture, a slap to the face of a lesser being was a formal challenge, a public declaration that the struck individual and their entire species were beneath the striker. The expected response was submission, to lower the head, step back, and accept the position of the inferior. Golvan stood tall, his forearms slightly spread, waiting for the human to kneel. Do-hyun turned his head back slowly. The blood sat on his lip like a thin red line drawn by a careful hand. His eyes found Golvan's eyes. They were steady and dark, and completely empty of fear. Behind him, Hana's hand gripped the arm of her chair so hard her knuckles went white. But she did not speak. She did not call him back. The chamber held its breath. Golvan waited. His forearms hung loose at his sides, the upper pair thick and armored, the lower pair already half-curled into fists. His mouth was open slightly, showing the flat grinding teeth of the Marathi, and his deep-set eyes were locked on the small human standing in front of him. He had done this before. Every Marathi trooper had. The slap was a tool, as old as their civilization. You struck the lesser creature, and it bent. It always bent. The biology demanded it. Smaller things submitted to larger things. That was the natural law of every world the Marathi had ever conquered. But the human was not bending. Kang Do-hyun stood where he had been standing before the slap. His head had turned back to center. The blood on his lip had not been wiped. His hands were at his sides, and his weight had shifted. Just barely. Just enough that someone who knew what to look for would have seen it. His left foot had moved half an inch backward. His right shoulder had dropped by a fraction. His breathing had not changed. Sunwoo, sitting 3 seats to the left, saw it. He had trained with operators long enough to recognize the shift. It was not a defensive posture. It was a launch position. His hand moved to his tablet, not to type, but to grip something solid, because he knew what was about to happen, and he wanted to be holding on to something when it did. Golvan tilted his head. The human was supposed to kneel by now. The human was supposed to lower its eyes and step back and accept its place. The silence was stretching too long. The chamber was watching. Golvan felt a flicker of something he did not recognize, because he had never felt it before in the presence of a smaller creature. It was not fear. It was closer to confusion. Why was this thing still standing? Why was it looking at him like that? He opened his mouth to speak again, to deliver another insult, to force the moment back onto the path it was supposed to follow. He never got the word out. Do-hyun moved. There was no wind-up, no shout, no warning. One instant he was still, and the next he was inside Golvan's guard, past all 4 arms, closer than any enemy had ever been, to the Marathi trooper while he was still alive. Do-hyun's right boot came up and drove into the side of Golvan's leading knee. Not the front, where the bone plate was thickest, but the side, where the joint flexed and the armor had a gap the width of 2 human fingers. The knee bent sideways, with a wet snapping sound that echoed through the silent chamber. Golvan's body pitched forward and down. 7 feet of bone-plated muscle suddenly collapsed toward the floor, like a building losing its foundation. His forearms reached out by reflex, grabbing at nothing, and a sound came from his throat. Not a word, not a roar, just the raw noise of a body that had never been broken before, discovering what breaking felt like. He never hit the ground. Do-hyun caught him on the way down. Both hands came up and locked on to the sides of Golvan's skull. His fingers found the spot, the temporal ridge, the thin line where two bone plates met but did not fully fuse. Every Marathi had it. It was a developmental feature of their species, a seam left over from their evolutionary history. Hidden behind the thickest part of their skull crest, where no natural predator on their homeworld could reach it. But Sunwoo had found it. 3 weeks ago, sitting in a quiet room on Earth's orbital station, reading declassified xenobiology papers that the Marathi thought no other species cared enough to study. He had flagged it in a briefing document with a single red line and the note, "Structural weakness, grip force required, approximately 300 psi sustained for 0.5 seconds. He had handed the document to Do-Yun without a word. Do-Yun had read it once. He had not asked questions. Now his hands closed. 300 pounds per square inch of focused, trained human grip strength drove into the seam on both sides of Golvan's skull. The bone plates cracked first, a sharp, brittle sound, like thick ice breaking under a boot. Then the structure beneath gave way. Golvan's skull compressed inward along the temporal ridge. His eyes went wide, then empty. His forearms dropped. His body went slack. Do-Yun released him. Golvan fell to the floor with a heavy, final thud that shook the seats around the human delegation. He would never move again. The elapsed time, from the moment Do-Hyun shifted his weight to the moment Golvan's body hit the floor, was under 2 seconds. The chamber erupted. Delegates scrambled backward in their seats. A Tasari diplomat screamed. The Halwyn representative was on her feet, her silver eyes locked on the dead Marathi trooper, with an expression that was equal parts horror and something else, something that looked almost like awe. Across the hall, translators buzzed and clicked, as dozens of species tried to process what they had just witnessed. Commander Dreas surged to his feet. His hand went to the sidearm at his belt. His face was twisted with rage, not grief, not shock, but the specific fury of a powerful creature that has just been proven wrong in front of everyone who matters. He barked an order in Marathi, and 4 of his guards moved toward the human section, their bone plates flaring, their upper arms raised. 1 step. He returned to his position, 2 paces behind Hana's seat. His hands were at his sides again. There was blood on them, not his own, and a fine dust of white bone fragments across his knuckles. His expression had not changed. His breathing had not changed. He stood the way he had stood before the slap, as if the last 2 seconds had been a brief interruption in an otherwise ordinary day. Hana did not turn around. She did not look at Golvan's body. She did not look at Dreas or his advancing guards. She leaned forward in her seat, pressed the button on her microphone, and spoke into the chamber, with a voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. Earth recognizes the Marathi dominance challenge, and has responded according to your own cultural customs. The challenge was initiated by your trooper on the council floor, under Section 4 of the Cultural Sovereignty Accord, which the Marathi Empire itself authored and submitted for ratification. A formal dominance challenge may be answered with any level of force, up to and including lethal response. She paused. The Marathi guards had stopped moving. Dryas's hand was still on his weapon, but he was no longer drawing it. He was listening. The entire chamber was listening. "We trust," Hana said. "There are no objections." High Arbiter Pelon stood at his podium. His thin hands were trembling. His translucent skin had gone a shade paler. He looked at Golvan's body on the floor, then at the human woman who had just cited Marathi law back at the Marathi, then at the quiet man standing behind her, with blood drying on his fingers. "Order," Pelon said. His voice cracked on the word. He said it again, louder. "Order. This session is suspended. All delegations will return to their quarters. A judicial review will be convened within the hour." The chamber began to empty. Species filed out in silence, giving the human section a wide berth. As Dryas passed, he looked at Do-Yun. Do-Yun looked back. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that the last 2 seconds had not already said. Sunwoo closed his tablet and stood. His hands were shaking slightly, but his face was composed. He fell into step beside Dohyun as they followed Hana toward the exit. "That briefing document," Sunwoo said quietly. "The one about the temporal ridge." Dohyun walked in silence for a moment. Then he said, "Good work." It was the most he had said all day. The judicial review was held in a smaller chamber on the lower ring of Station Orith 7. The room was plain. Gray walls, a curved table at the center, and rows of seats behind a thin barrier for observers. It was the kind of room where species came to argue about things that had already been decided by force, trying to wrap violence in the language of law. High Arbiter Palan sat at the head of the table. On one side sat Commander Dryas and 2 Marathi legal advisors, their bone plates darkened with age and authority. On the other side sat Yoon Hana, alone. She had declined the offer to bring additional delegates. She did not need them. Dohyun and Sunwoo waited in the human delegation quarters, 2 levels above. The room was small and functional. A table, 4 chairs, a window that looked out at the stars, and the slow spin of the station. Dohyun sat near the window. Sunwoo sat across from him with his tablet open, monitoring the review through a secure feed. Dryas spoke first. He stood at the table, with his 4 hands flat on the surface, and his voice shaking with controlled anger. "This was murder," he said. "A human soldier killed an unarmed Marathi trooper on the floor of the council hall. This is not a matter of cultural custom. This is an act of war against the Marathi Empire." Palan nodded slowly and looked at Hana. "Ambassador Yoon, how does the human delegation respond?" Hana opened a single document on the table's display screen. "Trooper Govan struck my military attaché with an open hand on the council floor, in view of the full assembly. Under Marathi cultural law, this is classified as a formal dominance challenge. I would like to read from the Marathi Empire's own submission to the Cultural Sovereignty Accord, ratified by this council 18 years ago. The language was formal, but the meaning was plain. When a Marathi warrior delivered a dominance strike to another being, the struck individual had the right to respond with equal or greater force, including lethal force. The purpose of the law was to ensure that dominance challenges carried real weight, that a Marathi who struck another being was accepting the risk that they might not walk away. The Marathi wrote this law, Hana said. They submitted it. They argued for its ratification. They have used it 11 times in the last 18 years to justify the killing of challenged individuals from 4 different species. None of those kills were prosecuted. None were even investigated. She looked at Dryas. You cannot write the rules and then complain when someone else plays by them. Dryas's jaw tightened. One of his legal advisors leaned in and whispered something. The law was written for Marathi challenges between Marathi and comparable species, he said. Humans are not comparable. They are not warrior species. The challenge was symbolic. There is no provision in the text for symbolic challenges, Hana said. The law does not distinguish between species. Your own words, Commander. I can read them again if you need to hear them. In the human quarters above, Sunwoo watched the feed and allowed himself a small, private smile. He had spent 2 days pulling the historical records that Hana was now using. 11 kills, 4 species, 0 consequences. Every single case followed the same pattern. A Marathi trooper struck a smaller being. The smaller being failed to respond, and the Marathi claimed cultural authority over the defeated species. It had worked every time. Until today. The review lasted 3 hours. Dryas argued. His legal advisors cited exceptions and precedents and technicalities. Hana dismantled each one with the calm precision of someone who had spent her career finding the exact sentence in the exact document that would make powerful people go quiet. Palan listened to both sides, asked careful questions, and kept his expression neutral, though his hands trembled whenever he looked at the human delegation's materials. In the end, the ruling was what it had to be. The law was the law. The Marathi had written it, and the humans had followed it. No charges would be filed. The death of Trooper Govan was ruled a lawful response to a formal dominance challenge under the Cultural Sovereignty Accord. Dreas stood from the table without a word. His legal advisors followed him. At the door, he stopped and turned back toward Hana. "This is not finished," he said. Hana looked at him. "It is if you want it to be." The door closed behind him, with a sound like a seal being pressed shut. Over the next 2 days, the station changed. Not loudly, not obviously, but in the small, quiet ways that mattered. Delegations that had never spoken to the human team began appearing outside their quarters. The Tasari representative, a nervous but sharp-minded female named Delegate Boryong, came first. She brought a data chip containing Tasari military training protocols and asked, in a careful voice, whether Earth might be interested in a joint training exchange. Hana accepted the chip and said she would review it. The Halwen delegate, the tall, silver-skinned female who had remained neutral through every vote for the past decade, sent a private message requesting a bilateral meeting. When Hana met with her, the Halwen spoke in slow, deliberate sentences about mutual defense interests and the value of partners who could act quickly in situations that required precision rather than size. She never mentioned Golvan by name. She did not need to. Even the smaller delegations, species that had never dared to approach the Marathi-dominated power structure, began sending quiet signals of interest. A trade offer here, a communication channel opened there. Nothing dramatic, but the direction was clear. The humans had done something that no other small species had ever done on that council floor. They had been struck, and they had struck back, and they had won. And now every species that had ever been afraid of the Marathi was doing the math on what an alliance with humanity might look like. On the evening of the second day, Palan requested a private meeting with Hana. They met in his personal office, a round room at the top of the station, with windows on every side, and a view of the stars that stretched in all directions. "I owe you honesty, Ambassador," Palan said. He sat behind his desk, with his thin hands folded. The membership review was placed on the agenda because Commander Dreas pressured me. I allowed it because I believed it would be a simple matter. I did not expect what happened. Hana sat across from him, her legs crossed, her expression patient. "What did you expect?" "I expected your delegation to protest, file an objection, and request a postponement. That is what smaller species do." He paused. "I did not expect your soldier to kill a Marathi trooper with his bare hands in under 2 seconds. Neither did the trooper," Hana said. Palan studied her. His pale ancient eyes were difficult to read. "How?" he asked. "Your species has no natural armor, no enhanced bone structure, no additional limbs. Your soldier is smaller, lighter, and by every biological measure, weaker than the Marathi he killed. How did he do it?" Hana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That has never been where we keep our weapons." Palan did not respond immediately. He looked out the window at the stars, as if searching for something in the distance that might help him understand the species sitting across from him. 2 levels below, in the human quarters, Do-Yun sat alone at the small table near the window. The stars moved slowly past the glass as the station rotated. In front of him was a cup of tea that Sun Wu had brought 20 minutes ago. The tea was still warm. Do-Yun looked at his hands. They were clean now. He had washed them thoroughly after the review, scrubbing the knuckles where Golvan's bone fragments had lodged in the creases of his skin. The skin was raw and slightly red, but undamaged. Sun Wu came back into the room. He sat down across from Do-Yun and opened his tablet, then closed it again. He looked like he wanted to say something, but was not sure how to start. Did he have a family? Do-hyun asked. Sunwoo blinked. The trooper? Yes. Sunwoo hesitated. I don't know. The Marathi don't publish personal records for military personnel. Do-hyun nodded. He picked up his tea and drank it slowly, looking at the stars. He did not speak again that evening. The final session of the Security Summit was held 1 week after the incident on the council floor. The bloodstain where Golvan had fallen had been cleaned, but Sunwoo noticed that several delegations still avoided stepping on that spot as they walked to their seats. It had become a kind of invisible marker, a place on the floor where the order of the galaxy had shifted, and everyone could feel it, even if they could not see it. The chamber was full. Every delegation was present. The noise was different this time. During the first session, the murmur had been loose and casual, the sound of species who knew their places and felt comfortable in them. Now the murmur was tighter, more careful. Delegates spoke in lower voices. Eyes moved more frequently toward the human section. The human section was no longer empty around the edges. During the first session, the seats nearest to Earth's delegation had been left vacant, a quiet social signal that no one wanted to be associated with the newcomers. Now those seats were occupied. The Tessari delegation had moved 2 rows closer. A small species called the Verath, who had not spoken to the humans once during the entire summit, had taken seats directly to their left. Even the Hallwen representative had shifted her position forward in the chamber, closer to the center, closer to the humans. Hana noticed all of it. She said nothing about it. Do-hyun stood in his usual position, 2 paces behind her chair. He wore the same plain dark uniform. His hands were at his sides. If anything had changed about him, it was invisible to the naked eye. But the delegates who passed near him gave him more space than they had before. Not out of disrespect. Out of the kind of careful attention that living creatures give to things they have reclassified in their minds. High Arbiter Palan entered the chamber and took his place at the central podium. He looked older than he had a week ago, or perhaps he had always looked that old, and the events of the summit had simply made it more visible. He raised his hand, and the room fell silent. We will now address the outstanding matter of Earth's membership status, Palan said. His voice was steady, though his hands rested flat on the podium as if he needed the support. Commander Dreas of the Marathi Empire submitted a motion to revoke the provisional membership of the human species. A formal review has been conducted. The council will now vote. Dreas was present. He sat in the Marathi section with his remaining guards around him, but his posture was different. A week ago, he had sat with the easy confidence of a commander who expected to win. Now he sat stiffly, his forearms folded tight against his body, his eyes fixed on the central floor. He had not spoken publicly since the judicial review. Reports from Sunwoo's intelligence contacts suggested that the Marathi Empire's internal leadership was displeased with Dreas. He had promised them a quick political victory, the removal of a weak species from the council. And instead, he had delivered a dead trooper, a legal embarrassment, and a galaxy-wide demonstration of exactly what the weak species could do. Palan called for the vote. Each delegation cast their decision through the electronic system embedded in their seats. The results appeared on the central display in real time. Against revocation, against revocation, against revocation. The votes came in quickly, one after another, filling the screen with the same result. The Tessari voted to keep Earth. The Hallwen voted to keep Earth. The Verath voted to keep Earth. 17 species voted to keep Earth. 2 abstained. 1 voted in favor of revocation. The Marathi. The motion failed. It was not even close. Pelion read the final tally aloud, then paused. He looked at the human delegation. Furthermore, he said, in light of the demonstrated military capability and strategic value of the human species, This council moves to upgrade Earth's membership from provisional to full permanent status, with military consultation rights effective immediately. A second vote was called. It passed with an even wider margin than the first. Hana stood. She walked to the central floor for the second time during this summit. And for the second time, the chamber went quiet when she reached the podium. She kept her speech short. She did not mention Gul'dan. She did not mention the slap, the kill, or the judicial review. She spoke about cooperation. She spoke about the value of judging species by what they could do together, rather than by how they looked apart. She spoke about respect, the kind that was earned, not given, and how Earth intended to earn it every day it held its seat in this chamber. She thanked the council, nodded to Pelen, and returned to her seat. There was no applause. The Galactic Union did not practice that custom. But the silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one that had greeted the humans when they first arrived. It was the silence of a room that was paying attention. As the session ended and delegates began to leave, a young Tessari officer approached the human section. She was small, even by Tessari standards, with quick dark eyes and the nervous energy that seemed common to her species. She stopped in front of Do-hyun and stood at attention, a military gesture of respect that she had clearly learned from studying human customs. "May I ask you something?" she said. Do-hyun looked at her. He waited. "How do humans train to move like that?" she asked. The question was genuine. There was no fear in her voice, only curiosity. The curiosity of a young soldier looking at something she did not understand, and wanting to learn. Do-hyun was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be thinking about the question carefully, turning it over, looking for the honest answer rather than the easy one. Finally he said, "We train because we are afraid. That is what makes us dangerous." The Tessari officer looked at him. Her dark eyes blinked twice. Then she nodded slowly, as if the answer had confirmed something she had already suspected, but had not been able to put into words. She gave him another military nod, turned, and walked away. Sun Woo appeared at Do-hyun's side. "Making friends?" he said. Do-hyun did not answer. He picked up his bag, and followed Hana toward the docking corridor where their shuttle was waiting. The walk through the station was different from the walk in. A week ago, they had moved through corridors full of species that either ignored them or looked at them with quiet contempt. Now, the corridors still parted as they passed, but the looks were different. There was caution in them. There was measurement. There was the particular kind of respect that comes not from admiration, but from recalculation. The look that says, "I was wrong about you, and I am adjusting my understanding." They boarded the shuttle. Hana took her usual seat by the window. Do-hyun sat across from her. Sun Woo strapped in near the back and immediately opened his tablet. As the shuttle undocked and pulled away from Station ORF-7, Hana looked at Do-hyun. "Intelligence reports say 17 species have updated their military threat assessments on humanity in the past week," she said. "All upgraded." Do-hyun looked at her. "Is that a good thing?" Outside the window, the station grew smaller, its silver ring shrinking against the vast black canvas of space. Somewhere in that station, delegations were filing reports, updating databases, and revising their understanding of a species they had dismissed as soft and small and irrelevant. "I don't know yet," Hana said, "but it is better than being ignored." Do-hyun nodded once. He leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. The shuttle accelerated, and the stars stretched into long lines of light around them as they jumped toward home. Behind them, the galactic community watched. They would keep watching now. They would study the humans, analyze them, try to predict them. They would argue in their council chambers and intelligence rooms about what humanity was capable of and what it might do next. They would look for weaknesses, for patterns, for the thing that made this small, soft, short-lived species so unexpectedly lethal. They would find some answers. But they would never find the one that mattered most, because it was not something that could be measured by scanners or recorded in databases. It was the simple, ancient truth that Doyen had given the young Tessari officer. The truth that had kept humanity alive through ice ages and plagues and wars, and the long dark silence before the stars opened up to them. They were afraid, and they had learned a very long time ago to make that everyone else's problem.